If I'd only followed my instincts, I'd never have boarded that doomed ship. When the Azure Sea Star left port, its passengers were all alive, each with smartphones and watches and tablets, as well as the cruise ship's own communications. Yet, not a single message was sent before it went missing. No distress calls. The fates of over 1,000 passengers and crew remain unknown, with only a handful recovered from a lifeboat days after the Sea Star herself vanished. But the Coast Guard's only statement on the lifeboat's recovery was that the passengers did not survive. Rumors circulated about a thermos full of eyeballs and a passenger whose mouth was stuffed full of severed fingers. But these details have been denounced as lies, sensationalizing and capitalizing on a tragedy. The official cause of the Sea Star's disappearance is a rogue wave. No survivors, no witnesses. Well, one witness. But perhaps I shouldn't tell. Better for the world if that ship stays lost forever. The families of the missing, however, deserve the truth. Which is why I'm posting. But first, a warning. The gruesome snippets I recounted above barely scratch the surface of the horror I'm about to share, some of which I took part in. I wake screaming every night. I sleep with the lights on. I never enter darkened hallways or stairwells. And I do not ever shake hands. Although I've always had some quirks, the handshake one is an old habit. Most of these are fresh, a consequence of my time aboard that doomed cruise ship. I do not intend to gloss over any details, but rather to give a complete accounting, including of my own involvement. So be forewarned. And understand that my story is one of unimaginable horror. To explain what really happened aboard the Sea Star, I need to first tell a little about myself. Sorry, I know. I'm like a bit of decorative wallpaper, just sort of there, but I see things. It all started when I was very young. I do promise this is relevant. I didn't want to swim in the community pool with my brother because the water was cloudy, hiding a shadowy figure in the deep end. I distinctly remember standing at the pool's edge, crying uncontrollably while my father urged, "Go on, jump in." My brother set the example, diving down to the bottom of the foggy water. When he came up, a silver dollar glinted in his fingers, which he dropped back into the pool before I could snatch it. "Oops, guess you gotta dive in for it." He laughed, the sun shimmering off his sunburned shoulders. "Come on, there's quarters down here too." Diving for coins was a game we played often, so I plunged in after him, kicking my way down with my eyes squeezed shut. When my hands grazed the rough cement bottom, I padded around. Silky hair tangled around my fingers like seaweed. I forced my eyes open against the stinging chlorine and shrieked. Wide, empty eyes stared back at me from a bloated face. When I shot to the surface wailing about a dead woman in the water, other swimmers looked on, perplexed. My older brother tried to console me and swore there were nothing but coins. He was correct. Not until a week later would a woman drown in that pool and sink to the bottom of the foggy water while swimmers unwittingly raced laps above her. The next time I saw was when I threw a tantrum over my grandmother's armchair. It smelled so bad, I grabbed my nose and exclaimed, "Ew!" My parents scolded me for my rudeness. Grandma occasionally struggled with incontinence. So, for her chair to stink was, they assumed, the result of an accident. They thought I was exaggerating to make fun of her, but in the sweltering summer, the smell was truly unbearable. Like rotting meat and diarrhea and cheap perfume all churned together. I threw such a fit, we left, though Grandma insisted on hugging me despite my being an awful brat. Her skin was wrinkled, papery thin, and soft as silk. But, despite the uncomfortable warmth of her apartment, her embrace was ice cold. Less than a week later, the call came. My grandmother had been found after a neighbor's complaint about the smell. She died in her chair. But when the seeing really clicked was in my tween years. 2 separate incidents. The first was after a classmate of my brother's pulled up in a car, reeking of burnt meat. The interior charred and black. He stepped out of the car, seeming not to notice that behind him, another version of him remained belted into the front seat. Unrecognizable through the char, beyond the glint of the gold chain melted into his neck. I burst into hysterical tears and screamed at my brother not to let him drive. The classmate laughed and called me a weirdo. He crashed later that week. The second incident began at a school function where my brother chaperoned me. A man pulled up in the school drop-off zones. He was one of the more popular teachers, famous for his yearly pizza parties. In the car with him were 2 young kids. I can't remember their names, just that the littlest boy was giggling and clinging to a toy T-Rex when he hopped out. My brother and I were asked to help carry the party supplies and drinks from the teacher's car. But the moment I opened the passenger door to grab a box, the reek of fetid pond water made my stomach lurch. I staggered back, clapping a hand to my nose and mouth. "Hey, everything all right?" The teacher asked. My brother, no doubt remembering what happened to his classmate weeks earlier, took me aside. Cold. Dark. The smell. Like the rot in the bottom of a lake. While I wrung my hands and sniffled, my brother watched the 2 young kids follow the teacher into the school. He shook my shoulder and said, Hey, we're going to save them." How? No one ever believes me. I believe you, Hope. Hey. He gave me a squeeze and looked into my eyes. Hope is the thing with feathers. What a dork. That line was from Emily Dickinson. My brother's favorite quote for me for when I was upset. It was corny, but encouraged me. A few minutes later, we were careening along the backwoods roads in the teacher's car. To this day, I don't know how my brother got the keys. His plan was, we'd stow the car in a garage for a couple weeks, long enough to outlast the vision, since my predictions always came true within about 6 days. But it hadn't occurred to either of us how being inside the car would affect me. The damp and rot washed over my skin. Cold. Every hair on my body stood erect, floating as if underwater. I couldn't breathe. Gagging on the fetid water, I rolled down my window. Raindrops from outside pelted my face, and something clicked. A sudden, terrible question. When I'd peered into the darkened interior, I hadn't been able to see who was inside the car. "Hey," my brother said, apparently struck by the same thought. "You're not foreseeing our deaths, are you?" I don't know if it was fate that caused us to fishtail just as he spoke, but also he may have hit something because there was a bump. All I know is suddenly we were flying, off the road and over the side toward a lake, and then plunging. And I snatched for his hand as the impact slammed us forward into the dashboard. Then the water wasn't just in my mind. It was real. It was pouring in through the car window. I fought, flailing, unbuckled, floundered through the half-open window. Luckily, I was still small enough to get through, swimming up and breaking the surface. "Corey? Corey!" But I knew already that my brother wasn't coming up. His hand had been cold when I touched it. Naturally, his death feels like my fault. In kinder moments, I remember that I was a child, and try to forgive myself for letting him get behind that wheel. But for a time, I was driven by the fierce need to atone. I sought desperately to save even one life, any life. I'd see a body swaying from a beam in a construction site. Legs dangling from the trunk of a car on the highway in front of me. A suitcase on sale in a luggage store, dripping blood. Every time, I tried to prevent the death, only to fail, or worse, cause it. Each loss drove home more deeply my shame, my failure, until, eventually, I gave up. I don't try to prevent the deaths anymore. These days I catch a whiff of that familiar, sickly, putrid scent, and I leave. I avoid human touch, especially handshakes. I've truly become wallpaper. Able to see, powerless to prevent. My name, incidentally, is Cassandra. I changed it because I could no longer bear my birth name. If hope is the thing with feathers, I was an angel of death, harbinger of doom to my brother and others. So instead, I call myself after the Greek priestess doomed to foresee the future, but never to be believed. Unable to prevent even one single tragedy. But let's get back to the cruise. The missing passengers. The eyeballs in the thermos. Oh, those grisly details. Mind you, Once you know, you can't unknow. No matter how much you drink or smoke, or however you drown your despair. Speaking of drowning, a month ago today, I hit the big 4-0. I celebrated my 4 decades of life by doing the one thing I've done consistently since I was old enough. Drinking away my failures. Every icy grip, every unheeded warning, and especially those times I've well and truly fucked up. Oh yes, those are the ones that call for some hard forgetting. I was on my 2nd or 7th drink at my favorite bar when a voice exclaimed, "Evening, friend." A woman with shimmering purple eyeliner and matching purple hair approached. It was the musician who often played there, Lily Tsuki. To be honest, she was the primary reason I frequented that bar, though we'd hardly spoken beyond my occasional compliments about her playing. She slid into the seat next to mine and clinked my glass. "Roy at the bar told me it's your 40th. I see you in here once a week. Always tipping well and drinking like you're trying to drown yourself. Someone did something kind for me recently, so I'm trying to pass it on." She fished a hand into her pocket and, to my surprise, produced a gift card for a cruise. I didn't catch all of her story in the noisy bar, but apparently one of her admirers was very rich. Always offering her gifts verging on the inappropriate. After finding out she'd be playing on the Azure Sea Star, said admirer sent her the card so she could spoil herself on the cruise. She didn't feel comfortable accepting, so she gifted it to me. "There's enough on there to cover your fare. Don't thank me, thank you. I needed to get rid of it. Enjoy your 40th, friend." As she handed me the card, her fingers brushed mine. Warm. Alive. I mumbled my thanks, cheeks warm. Why? Because she chose me? Blushes? I'm an idiot. Still, I was glowing, and not just because I was tipsy. Why not? Why not treat myself this once? The Azure Sea Star. It sounded like a dream. I'd go see Lily Tsuki play at the piano bar against the backdrop of a glimmering ocean. I'd drink under the stars, get a tan, get my sea legs. And every hand would be warm, and every breath would taste of the summer breeze. 9 decks, 11 including the crew-only levels. Over 1,000 people. Pools, bars, restaurants, lounges, cafes, spas, cabaret. The Sea Star truly was the Ritz-Carlton on the water. I was absolutely giddy. Of course, before the luxury came the wait. Just like the airport, parking, luggage, ticketing, security. It was when I neared the entrance for ticketing, enjoying the summer breeze, that I caught the traces of a sour odor. A whiff of decay. So faint beneath the car exhaust and smell of the salt water that I might have missed it, were I not attuned to death. At port, it was likely an unfortunate animal packed into a shipping crate and decomposing. I'd even read horror stories of people trafficked in sealed shipping containers and asphyxiating. That faint whiff made my insides curdle. Then I was inside the air-conditioned terminal, packed with passengers, and inhaling nothing but the blessed AC. The check-in was surprisingly quick. I followed the embarkation signs up the escalator to the terminal's upper level. Through the double glass doors, greeted on my right by printed images of pool decks and steaks and wine glasses. On my left, through the enormous paned wall of glass, the sea star herself loomed. My God, she was enormous. So many decks, so many balconies. Then I squinted a little closer. What was that speck? A tiny figure, draped on a railing. My heart dropped to my toes. Something was horribly wrong. The figure, small against the massive width of the ship, had no face. Only a torso and most of its arms. It had been decapitated, and dried blood splattered the rail. My footsteps slowed. I pressed against the glass, eyes rapidly roving the rest of the ship. Was it just one incidence of violence, or... Perhaps I wasn't seeing correctly. It was a stunt. A practical joke, a mannequin. I needed to get closer. I hurried along the terminal, joining the line out to the gangplank. The bowl of the sky had turned deep purple, the sun lowering towards the horizon, and in the sea star's deep shadow, the temperature dropped. A sudden chill gripped me as I trotted out onto the gangplank. I sniffed. Sniffed again, more deeply. Rot. The same putrid odor I'd caught outside. A passenger ahead of me noticed me grabbing my nose and remarked, "Not used to that ocean smell?" I did not respond, because now that I was close enough to see the ship more clearly, I noticed cracked glass, broken panes in the sliding glass doors of the cabins. No! I gasped, sinking to my knees, and the passenger kindly leaned to help me up. As her hand seized mine, it was cold. I jerked back so fast I actually collapsed into the passenger behind us. A mother and her daughter. My hand brushed the daughter's bare arm. Cold. "Are you okay?" asked the daughter, a child of about 12. I crawled back from her, and another person, an elderly gentleman, leaned down to help me up, his hand on my elbow. Cold. "Miss?" he asked. "Miss?" But I bolted, barely hearing their cries as I launched myself back towards the terminal. No. My eyes watered, and my belly bunched into knots, and my heart lurched into my throat, and oh God, the ship! The whole entire ship! It was dark. Windows broken. Not a single light shining in the interior, and spatters of blood here and there visible on its decks and balconies. But worst of all was the smell. I hadn't even entered the ship yet, and I already knew, in the way only I can know, that the smell wasn't just one body or two, Not if I could detect it all the way out on the gangplank. All the way out at the entrance to the terminal. For the whiff of putrefaction to have spread so far, the source was something massive. A colossal pile of decomposing bodies like a herd of dead elephants. That ship. No one on that ship was going to make it back. As I entered the terminal with its blessed filtered air and the windows between me and the ship, I turned and looked at the line stretching behind me. Passengers laughing, chatting, dressed in their finest, flirting, teasing, buzzing with excitement, old and young couples, children. Everyone on this ship is going to die. And I'm the only one who knows. Imagine walking into a burning building, and everyone laughs and tells you the fire's all in your head. When no one believes you, are you going to stay to burn with them? Every passenger in that crowd waiting to embark on the luxury cruise was already dead. They just didn't know it yet. I stared through the windows of the terminal at the magnificent sea star, at the broken glass and spatters of blood that only I could see. And then I fled. Without warning a single soul. What would have been the point? My name is Cassandra. I see death 6 days before it happens, and can feel it if I shake a cold hand. But no matter what I do, I can never, ever prevent it. My flight took me as far as the escalators before a flash of purple brought me screeching to a halt. Lily? No, it wasn't the purple-haired musician who'd gifted me the cruise gift card. But suddenly I remembered how I'd been looking forward to hearing her performance aboard this very vessel. Oh, God. It was one thing to turn my back on doomed strangers. Terrible as it sounds, it's a bit like reading about a catastrophe in the news. Quite another thing to abandon someone I knew. Could I really leave her to become one of the bodies putrefying in the belly of the sea star? Every time I ordered a drink at my favorite bar, I'd remember I hadn't even tried to save her. Fuck. Oh, fuck me sideways. How much time? 90 minutes. 90 minutes to get on board, find the musician, and... what? Convince her to disembark? How? And yet, my feet were already turning towards the gangplank. Because, as it turns out, I would rather plunge headlong into a ship full of the rotting dead than face an empty piano bench, and the guilt that no amount of alcohol would ever drown. But to have any chance at persuading Lily, I'd need to know how the passengers died. This meant that in addition to finding a purple-haired needle in a Titanic-sized haystack, a horrifying task loomed ahead of me. I was going to have to do something I had not done in a very long time. Plunge directly into my vision. Walk into its very maw and face whatever gruesome horrors lurked at the source of that nauseating odor. I was going to have to find the bodies and whatever killed them.
Boarding.
The stench was so overpowering after crossing the gangplank that I dropped to my knees and dry heaved. The flow of passengers moved around me past the concierge desk. I must have looked exceptionally sick because a pretty girl in a suit skirt approached, asking if I needed assistance. She reached out a hand to help me up. Cold. I staggered away from her and inside. Then, because I felt I might throw up, quickly found my way out to the promenade deck in the blessed breeze. Lifeboats hung overhead. Beyond the rail, the sea sparkled in the afternoon sun. Cushioned loungers lined the deck. None were in use, presumably because the pool, patio, spa, and other amenities on the upper decks had much more attractive areas for lounging. I leaned against the rail and gulped the air, listening to the waves splash against the side of the boat, noting blood spatters further down, but nothing signifying the cause of the blood. Just vague signs of violence. After circling the entire promenade deck and spotting only the occasional blood spatterings, I gritted my teeth, pulled my shirt collar up over my nose, and plunged into the nearest door. The Sea Star's interior had the atmosphere of a luxury hotel. People milled about the restaurant and shopping areas, buzzing with excitement, talking about cabaret shows and fine dining, while perky crew members answered questions, all perfectly oblivious to the putrid, sweet, rotting stench. I'd most likely find Lily at the piano lounge, but since I didn't have any plausible explanation for what had happened to the passengers, I continued wandering, entering a bustling cafe overlooking the ship's grand staircase. Stepping over an enormous bloodstain on the carpet, I passed the counter, nauseated by the fancy pastries behind their glass cases, peering among the tables and chairs. Paused when I spotted an eyeball in a teacup. No trace of how it got there. No body with an empty socket. Just the eyeball, swirling in a congealed bloody jelly at the bottom of a cup. I scurried away, snatching a cloth napkin to cover my nose. The interior darkened as I ascended the central staircase. No electricity, I noted as I clutched the railing. Why would the power be cut? A storm? But storms don't scoop out eyeballs with a dessert spoon. Coming onto deck 6, I peered down a long, dim corridor lined with passenger cabins. To passengers coming and going, the hall was illuminated by electric lighting. But since I was seeing the ship 6 days in the future, the narrow hallway vanished into blackness. With no way to enter the cabins, and nothing much to see here or on the other dimmed halls of the passenger decks, I ascended until I reached the pool.
Pool deck.
Deck 9 opened to wide panoramic windows, dining, a spa, and of course, the pool. I emerged outdoors with relief, removing the napkin from my nose as the sea breeze gave some respite from the odor. Around me, people partied in bikinis and beachwear and suits, sipping all manners of drinks around the sky-blue swimming pool. A young woman stretched on a blood-spattered lounger, oblivious to the gore beneath her tanned figure. A few bodies floated among the swimmers, bloated and discolored. My vision shimmered briefly as a teen boy swam right through one of the bodies, splashing as if it were not there. My heart lurched when I realized that it was his own, albeit dressed in different clothes. Oof! I grunted as a small figure bashed into me, her arm grazing mine. "Sorry," cried a little girl in a pink swimsuit, bolting by as her mother yelled at her to watch out for people. I tried not to think of how cold the little girl's arm felt. Counted the bodies. 8 in the pool, 1 by the towel bin, head caved in. I made a circuit of the pool, occasionally brushing against people. Cold, cold, cold. No survivors, it seemed. But why? That was when I spotted a shirtless old man sitting at a table under an umbrella. I froze, goosebumps prickling along my skin. Unlike the floaters, there was no obvious reason for his death. His back was to me, the bare skin of his shoulders gray and blotchy. In his hand, he held a broken drinking glass. He was positioned in repose. So, what killed him? My heart quickened as I moved round to the front of him. His mouth hung open, shards of glass and a mangled tongue lolling out. Crimson trailing down his chest. The source of the chewed glass was obvious. The cup in his hand was broken, its jagged edges bloody. He'd died choking on the glass. What the fuck is happening here?
Forward stairwell.
The jogging track and the sun deck, decks 10 and 11, offered a stunning bird's-eye view of the pool and the ocean. But I did not stop to take this in as I circled to the bow, opting to take the forward stairs down rather than the central. The stench hit me like a cloud. I had to stop as I descended into the dim stairwell, clinging to the railing, doubled over, gagging. It was so bad. My eyes watered, my stomach bucked, and it was dark. Thank God for my phone's flashlight. I fumbled it on, and, napkin firmly over my nose, plunged down into the depths. The phone's thin illumination flashed along the carpeted stairwell in the hall of the first passenger decks. I kept descending. Paused at an unidentifiable slick red mound. I was examining it under my light when a crew member jogged up to me and asked, "Lose something, miss?" "Just my marbles." I muttered, shooing the crew member away and inadvertently brushing his hand. Cold. I turned my attention back to the mound. A slimy pile of intestines on the stairwell, trailing down to a disemboweled body. Intestines. Eyeballs. Eating broken glass. Nothing about this makes sense. I swiveled the beam to check further downward. That was when I found the source of the odor. My path down was obstructed by a mass of bodies. The ones underneath seemed to have been trampled, but the ones on top... I squeezed my watering eyes and retched against the wall. Some of the bodies bore horrible mutations. Fingers bent and twisted, joints out of alignment, faces smashed in and jaws torn open. Many more appeared to have been crushed in the press of bodies. Best guess, there was a wave of panicked people rushing upstairs from below, colliding with the wave of others fleeing down from above. Why this staircase? What was near this part of the ship? The cabaret lounge, I realized. No electricity, no elevators. This was the nearest stairwell to the auditorium. Closer. I was inching closer to uncovering the fates of the passengers, and yet I still had no idea what the passengers were fleeing from. Who were the attackers? Or... I thought of the eyeball. The glass chewed and swallowed. An icy pinprick at the base of my skull whispered the question I didn't want to ask. Why? Why did some of the passengers go mad and do it to themselves?
Piano bar.
I took the long way to the cabaret theater, going all the way back up the stairs and coming down the central staircase, only to detour on hearing the notes of a piano. I found myself in a cozy lounge and spotted a purple-haired figure at the keys. And just in time. The ship was due to depart in less than half an hour. Lily! I rushed over. The musician's face lit.
Oh, it's you, friend. You made it.
You've got to get off the ship.
Off the
I know it seems crazy, but you've got to. Everyone on board is going to die. I've seen it because I'm psycho. I heard it a second later and smacked my forehead. I mean psychic. Psychic! I can see the future. At her scrunched eyebrows, I burst. Look, I know how I sound, but I've been able to see things since I was a little girl. And I am telling you, this ship is going to go dark. The engines will cut out. People are going to flee and trample each other on that forward staircase. Launching into a rapid-fire recounting, I was just getting to the eyeball in the teacup when she interrupted.
You're afraid of some sort of terrorist attack?
No. It's almost like a kind of madness, a contagion that spreads through the ship.
A zombie apocalypse?
Not zombies.
Poltergeist? Possession?
She played a riff from a horror movie.
Should we call an exorcist?
We should leave. I checked my phone. Quickly!
What an odd duck you are. I can't imagine any sort of catastrophe as big as you're saying. You know this ship has tons of safety protocols. And even if I did believe some disaster were drawing near, do you really think I could abandon crowds and crew?
She looked at me over her glasses, shimmering purple lips curving into a smile.
Listen, friend. If this were the Titanic and I was the only one who could see the iceberg, I'd stay to steer us right, not run off leaving everyone to die.
Icy fingers raked along my spine. Even if she wasn't taking me seriously, she was right. I did have a moral obligation to save people. An obligation I'd been trying to fulfill ever since I was a little girl. Until the attempt killed my brother. And even after, I kept trying for years and years until I realized that there is no way to change anything. That is why I call myself Cassandra. For the Greek prophet doomed to predict the future but never be believed. Try and prevent what I've foreseen? You might as well try and pluck the stars from the sky. Every hand I'd touched was cold. Everyone on board would die. My fists balled, fingernails digging so hard into my palms they bled. You really have no idea what you're asking of me.
Oh, I'm not telling you to stay. I'm just explaining why I have to. Besides, I'm under contract.
She winked and focused on her playing as guests entered and sat at nearby tables. She had no idea. None whatsoever. If I thought there was even a sliver of a hope, I wouldn't abandon people. Oh, if this happy-go-lucky musician understood the futility. But she will. Came another darker thought. She will know the full depth of the horror coming. No.
Huh? Wait, friend. Where are you going?
But I was not listening. The cabaret theater. Was the answer there? The reason for the crush of bodies in the forward stairwell. I rushed past the cafe with the eyeball in the teacup, through the grand doors, into the cabaret hall. But the cabaret hall was surprisingly quiet. A few passengers mingled here or there, unnoticing of the cadavers draped on chairs and tables. The stage itself was pristine. The wood smooth and polished in the fading orange light through the windows. Apparently, the origin of the panicked flight up the forward stairwell was not this grand entertainment venue. Nothing here supported that theory. Nonetheless, I gave the place a thorough search until my phone's battery ran low, and then I returned to the grand staircase. In one direction lay passenger cabins. In the other, the gangplank back to the port terminal. And safety. It's not too late to be a coward, Cass. Run from the ship. Run from the empty piano bench at the bar. Find a different, cheaper hole in the wall to crawl into like the cockroach you are. Always the survivor, eh? Or I could try just one more time. Hope, my brother always said, is the thing with feathers. And look what happened to him! Flashed through my mind. My heart slammed against my ribcage. I'd just die too, unless I left in the next how many minutes? I checked my phone, but it was dead, like I would be if I stayed. A horn sounded the Sea Star's departure. A distant cheer rose up from the upper decks and balconies. I felt a brief, panicky impulse to run back out on deck and throw myself off the ship. But in truth, my fate had already been decided before the ship's horn blew. I hadn't been paying attention earlier, but I'd been rubbing and rubbing my hands, and finally realized they were cold. Probably had been since I boarded. I shuffled leaden feet toward the passenger cabins, feeling along the brass number plates until I reached 4044. My cabin. Reached for the knob and stopped. That smell. Dread squeezed my intestines like a wet rag. Smoke. Burnt meat. I wrinkled my nose and opened the door. Orange rays shone through the window. The sunset so vivid it almost gave the illusion that the room was on fire. The walls and ceiling were charred. The edges of the mattress and sheets a smoldered ruin. The worst damage was the small sofa by the coffee table. Broken bottles scattered around. And there, on the sofa, my fingers went limp on the door handle as I stared into melted sockets of a body charred beyond recognition. A dark line encircled its wrist, the blackened remnants of a charm bracelet. My bracelet. While the man on the pool deck swallowed glass, I would succumb to the insanity here, dousing myself in alcohol and flame, burning myself alive. I've seen bodies mashed, crushed, dismembered, stuffed into suitcases, blackened like meat on a grill, floating, bloating, with flies swarming their flesh and maggots wriggling out of their eyes. I have, in short, an intimacy with death. But nothing prepared me for the horror in cabin 4044. I stared at my own smoldering corpse, into the blackened sockets of my melted eyes, and ice racked my spine and splintered my bones, shivering all the way down to my frozen fingertips. You knew this day would come, whispered a voice in my head. And then, as my nose wrinkled, ugh, I smell like bacon. Giggles. Ah, dear. Not beneficial. Couldn't I try to approach my death with some dignity? No? Well, fine. Ignoring my own bubbling hysteria, I held my napkin over my nostrils and leaned in. Cross-legged in a lotus position, hands cradled and thumbs touching. Crispy me held the pose of a meditating monk. From the liquor bottles scattered around the burnt wreckage, as well as the pose, I'd started the fire myself. But what induced such madness? Glowing white light suddenly emanated from the blackened sockets. I gasped, tumbling backwards over the coffee table. When I sat up, the light was gone. It did not reappear during the half hour I charged my phone, keeping one leery eye on my corpse while I used the ship's spotty Wi-Fi for research.
A mysterious contagion.
According to Google, the worst cruise disaster in modern times involved the partial capsizing of a vessel after a captain's error led to a rock tearing open the hull. Of the 4,000 passengers, 34 drowned. Another ship, infamously dubbed the Poop Cruise, had its engines catch fire and the passengers were stranded for nearly a week on board without electricity or toilet facilities. However, the Sea Star was not destined for any ocean or weather-related incident, but rather a contagion. And while coronavirus and norovirus have both afflicted cruise ships in recent years, no virus, not even rabies, could explain the self-mutilation. To say nothing of the virulence. A mortality rate of 100%. That was unheard of in nature. There should be some survivors, if only by happenstance. Or is it because? A terrible chill spread up the flesh of my arms, and a thought lodged like an ice pick in my skull. What if the doom of the Azure Sea Star isn't happenstance, but deliberate? Are there no survivors because someone doesn't want there to be? Numb at the implication, I sat down my phone. But how? Why? 1,000 passengers and crew? If there was someone planning such a disaster, how would I identify them? And why would anyone commit such an atrocity? My gut tightened, and I got up and ventured out to the upper decks.
Deck 9.
Cold, cold, cold. The chill in my bones deepened with each hand I brushed. Passengers glared as I fumbled around, dismissing me as either blind or mentally feeble. The blindness was somewhat accurate. I couldn't see under the electric lighting in the swanky interior, since my eyes were seeing 6 days in the future, when the Sea Star would be plunged into a blackout. I depended on my phone's feeble flashlight as I navigated the sea of guests around the bar and lounge areas. But no matter how many arms and hands I bumbled into, cold. With no accidental survivors, I was becoming more and more convinced the Sea Star's doom must be deliberate. But I was still very much in the dark, literally and figuratively, about why. The most useful discovery of the evening came after my collision with a heavyset older man whose drink I spilled. Noticing me sweeping around my phone's pitiful beam and assuming I'd lost something, he offered to lend me a more powerful flashlight from his cabin. "It's one of those high-powered ones if you want it." He smiled, and I stared, every hair on my neck standing on end. Something on my face?" His smile turned into a confused frown under my phone's light. No, yes. A flashlight would be very helpful, thank you. "This way. My name's John, by the way." His grin returned. Oh, God. I'd recognized him. Glass-chewing man. He had a name now. I am ashamed to admit that I tried not to speak to him too much on the way to his cabin, despite his doing me a kindness. It's so much harder to face death with names and histories attached. I remained standing outside his cabin door, looking incredibly guilty, as he emerged and set into my hand the flashlight. When I turned it on, it sent a floodlight straight down the corridor, one end to the other. In addition to this useful tool, the encounter brought a critical insight. His clothes. Glass chewing involved a different outfit. So, the catastrophe would not strike tonight.
Pool deck.
After brushing roughly 1 billion cold hands, as the overnight crowd began thinning, I took myself out to a lounger. Being unwilling to overnight in my cabin, wreathed in the fumes of my own char-grilled corpse, voices woke me up in the dead of the night. The moon and stars offered the only illumination over the pitch sea, and I shambled groggily to the rail. It struck me that the wind had died. The sea star was stationary. Out on the pale peaks of the waves, a rescue craft bobbed up and down.
Looks like some idiot went overboard.
Complained a voice behind me. A cluster of passengers had gathered. One, with the authority of an experienced cruiser, mentioned the possibility of a suicide jumper.
It shouldn't affect our itinerary much. These things happen at sea, you know. After the rescue, he or she, let's call them Passenger X, will be taken to the infirmary and monitored by security.
I didn't hear the rest of his words, because I was too busy smacking my forehead as I burst. The infirmary? Good fucking gracious, was my brain already barbecued? I suspected a contagion, yet hadn't thought to search the infirmary. Snatching up my flashlight, I headed downstairs, but the lower decks were cordoned off. A jovial crewman explained the passengers' access was restricted during rescue operations.
Also, it's 3 a.m.
He added, sipping coffee from a styrofoam cup.
The infirmary will open, I think, around 8.
Which deck?
Deck 2.
He gladly explained the layout when I asked. The lower decks also included crew quarters, a crew lounge, mess hall, the engine room, kitchens, food storage, the highway, used for quickly trafficking trolleys from one end of the ship to the other, the infirmary, various machinery rooms, a brig, a morgue.
We mostly use it for like chillin' flowers and stuff like that, though.
He added with a grin. There was also a third staircase near the stern of the ship, the aft stairwell, used regularly only by staff, but open to passengers in case of emergency. As he rattled off this list, I could feel myself plunging deeper into despair. This ship was so enormous, and so much of what lay below was off-limit to passengers. Furthermore, there were no windows below. How was I even going to make my way in the blackout? Even with John's flashlight, the prospect was daunting. But first things first, Cass. The infirmary.
Infirmary.
At 8 a.m. sharp, I stepped into the infirmary. The waiting room was as ordinary as they come, complete with boring magazines and cheap office chairs and, because it was deep in the interior, pitch dark to my sleep-deprived eyes.
Morning, sweetie. How can I help you today?
The secretary at the front desk tipped her head toward me, revealing a glimpse of another face beneath my flashlight. Mouth gaping and mangled, every tooth pulled out. Blissfully unaware that she was sharing her chair with her own corpse, the secretary smiled and gave me a clipboard of paperwork for check-in. While I filled out the forms by flashlight, footsteps shuffled near the desk. The secretary struck up a conversation with somebody I assumed was a nurse. My ears pricked when they gossiped about last night.
Did you hear about the rescue? When they pulled him out of the water, he wasn't breathing.
I pretended to be engrossed in the forms.
As soon as they revived him, he started screaming and screaming.
Oh my God. Seriously?
Yeah, and he was like super aggressive. They had to sedate him.
Oh my God.
It's really weird. They're saying he might have come from another ship, and it might have been, like, days that he was out on the water.
So this passenger X, who was pulled in last night, had just been drifting out on the ocean? He wasn't a jumper? And he was screaming and screaming, like perhaps someone maddened. I was about to abandon my forms and search for this passenger X when the secretary all but gave me a heart attack by materializing in front of me out of the dark. She took the paperwork and informed me the nurse was ready. I was directed to a small examination room. One of 3, I noted, as I swept my beam around the infirmary. Examining tables, chairs, computers. No sign of any screaming passenger. Where would they have brought him? The nurse, a young woman in a hijab, asked me the typical questions, typing my responses into a computer with a cracked, dead screen. Is he all right? The man who was rescued? Was he drifting long? She responded pertly.
We're still trying to ascertain. But don't worry, he's being helped.
Her brows scrunched as she shone a light into each of my eyes. Of course, I forgot to warn her.
That's so strange. Are you wearing contact lenses?
No, my eyes are very black. Even under a flashlight, they don't reflect any light. They've been that way since I was 4 years old. I was dead for nearly an hour from drowning, but revived, and everything came back normal except for my eyes. I'd always believed my horrific visions were the result of my near-death experience. As if I wasn't supposed to come back, and brought a little bit of death with me, just in my eyes.
Whoa! What a wild story.
You have no idea. I replied, looking at her corpse peering out at me from under the examination table, all jammed around the base. A knock on the door cut our exam short before I could warn her. Not that it would have made any difference. She asked me to wait for a few moments and stepped outside. When she did not immediately return, I slipped away in search of passenger X.
Highway.
The moment I stepped out of the infirmary and away from the nearby elevator lounge, it became evident I'd left the passenger areas. All veneer of luxury was stripped away, leaving bare walls interrupted only by occasional stacks of boxes. The flashlight's wide beam swept along the massive corridor that I was guessing was the highway. My footsteps resounded on concrete. Nothing but sterile, windowless, white. Or at least it had been, once. I tried not to look too closely at the crimson streaking the walls or the corpses I stepped over. The origin of the contagion was definitely down here. Even through the napkin held over my nose, I could taste death here. Hello? What was this? In one section of the corridor, the walls and floor had rippled. Almost as if a shockwave had left indentations, bending and shattering the concrete. But what could have done that? The lights flickered. I froze. It wasn't my flashlight's beam. That remained steady. The lights, the overhead lights, flickered, casting the hall in blinking flashes of crimson streaks and white walls. Then, the lights came on. All the bodies vanished. Oh, I said, blinking against the sudden brightness. Oh. The smell was gone, too. No scent of death. Though there was something else. A strangely metallic, tangy smell. Like lightning and copper. I shut off my flashlight, turning a slow circle as I gawked at the stark white walls. The flat gray floor. The dazzling fluorescent lighting so bright it almost blinded me. It struck me that I was seeing the ship right now. Not 6 days in the future, but now. Before the blackout, before the outbreak. The same whitewashed hallway as all the other passengers saw. Why? What had happened to my vision? Had I lost my special sight? Or... Someone was standing in the corridor. I froze. The hairs on my neck prickled, and a knot of dread twisted my gut. The man stood halfway down the hallway, slouched and bedraggled. His clothes were crushed and faded, hanging off him like hangers of bone. His limp hair draped in messy curls around his unshaven face. And his eyes, those eyes, the same eyes I'd seen staring emptily from John's glass-chewing corpse, and from the mangled nurse under the table. All the dead have the exact same look in their eyes. One glance at those pale blue orbs. This man was dead. I was certain of it. Yet, he was standing. You are the passenger who... The dead man's lips spread, baring teeth in what might have been a sick imitation of a grin, or a grimace. Hey. I jumped as a voice called out from behind me. An officer in a security uniform strode out from an unmarked door, eyes on the dead man. The security officer said,
Ma'am, stay back.
His gaze never left the dead man.
Sir, if you could please come with me.
No, don't! But the security officer was already marching forward, and the dead man's hands lifted in stiff parody of surrender. He turned and began shuffling away under the officer's escort. And then, his teeth bared. Suddenly, the dead man had his arm around the officer, mouth clamping on his ear as the officer howled. He was eating him. No. Tongue wriggling? Licking him? Whispering? The officer shoved the dead man aside and collapsed against the wall. I rushed forward, but skidded to a halt as the dead man's grinning face turned toward me. Terror seized me at the sudden realization that I was next. He took a wobbly step. The lights shut off. Swearing, I fumbled for my flashlight, switched on the beam, shrieked when it fell across a hand. But it was just the security officer reaching for me, asking,
Hey, are you all right, ma'am?
He winced, rubbing at his ear like a dog bothered by a whistle only it could hear. Then, he said into his phone,
He assaulted me and got away. I've got another passenger here.
The stench wafted back. Gore once again splattered the walls. I was once more seeing 6 days into the future, and clapped my napkin back to my mouth to stop myself from retching at the return of the smell. But I wasn't really thinking about all that. No, because my heart slammed my ribs and my breath ripped ragged from my throat, and every hair stood on end as if I'd been struck by lightning. Whatever it was the crew of the Sea Star had hauled from the ocean, it certainly hadn't been living when they rescued it. And the proof was in those overhead lights. Merely being in proximity to Passenger X, my vision had been pulled into the present. Like he was a magnet, drawing my sight into his field. But if death was the thing my black, lightless eyes usually glimpsed, then what exactly was Passenger X? And if he could affect my vision, not to mention animating a dead man's corpse, how was I going to have any hope of stopping him? There's a reason I call myself wallpaper. A reason I stay to the edges of things, rather than rushing to the center. If you've stuck with me from the beginning, you know that every vision I have is essentially like walking into a graveyard and stepping on the soil over the buried dead. It's only a fool who goes digging and tries to bring them back. Somewhere on this ship, the corpse of a drowned man shambles through the endless corridors of the lower decks. From the remarks that occasionally passed between the security officers, it was clear that this mysterious Passenger X had not yet been located. What's more, the security staff did not realize that this passenger, a corpse they'd pulled from the sea in a rescue, was spreading a contagion. And they had locked up the only person who recognized the danger. Me. Yep, that's right. I was in the brig. Which is often the sort of situation I find myself in when I leave my role as wallpaper and make the mistake of trying to interfere. Security staff caught me in restricted areas one too many times, confiscated my phone and flashlight, and confined me to the ship's jail. In a velvet dark so deep, I might as well have been sealed in a tomb. I sat cross-legged in the pitch, palms cradled and thumbs touching, willing the seconds to pass. Nothing you do will change anything. I opened my eyes and I could almost see the blackened sockets of my crispy corpse. A hallucination, I knew, induced by long hours in the dark. Crispy me whispered, The outbreak will happen. Even if you do find the passenger, it will just lead you right back here. To me. I could almost smell my own burning flesh. When the lock finally clicked and a gruff man's voice spoke, I was so deep in desolation that I missed his words. What? I said, you want to get out of here? Think you've been in here long enough to learn your lesson. It took me a moment to realize he was holding the door open for me. I can't see. Maybe try opening your eyes? He wisecracked. I did. It made no difference. My eyes were seeing 6 days in the future, when the Sea Star would be in a blackout and littered with the dead. May I have my phone? Rustling. It took me a moment to realize he was holding it out in my direction. I fumbled my hands in front of myself, managed to grab it. After so long in blackness, I was itching for even the faintest trace of light. I'd had the feeling there was something in the dark with me, sitting on the bench just next to me. And I'd been imagining it as my crispy corpse. But was anything really there? Or was the nauseating stench just the general stink of the ship? You shine that thing in my face, it's coming right back with me. Understood, sir. I swept the phone's feeble light through the cell behind me, noting a figure in the corner, slumped over just behind where I'd been sitting. The security chief. He was missing both eyes, and his mouth was split into a bloody grin over chewed bits of flesh he'd apparently bitten out of both arms, gnawing until he bled to death.
Piano lounge.
Evening, friend.
Lily called out to me as I slunk into the stool at the bar. In the slanted sunlight tipping through the windows, her purple hair gleamed, almost magenta. She called out with her usual levity.
So, they let you out?
I ordered a drink and took a swallow, eyelids fluttering at the honeyed warmth. You heard about that, huh?
Word is, you've been going around harassing people all day with a flashlight. You'd better watch it, or they'll kick you off at the next port.
We aren't making it to the next port. I muttered, knocked back the rest of my drink. I was reaching for another when the musician took a seat next to me and ordered a drink of her own.
To your 40th.
She said, and clinked my glass.
Want to tell me why you're trying so hard to waste that gift card I gave you?
The man they rescued last night. I stared down into my drink. I saw him, roaming the hallways. He's the source of the disaster in my visions. The nurses said he went missing. He's going to start a contagion of madness and death. The musician's eyes danced with merriment.
You're pretty far out, you know that? But you can stop worrying. He's not missing.
What do you mean?
I mean they know exactly where he is. In the morgue.
Dead. I knew it. I could tell just by looking at him. Already dead when they pulled him in. His body used as bait, as a host for whatever thing had come aboard when they rescued him. I shot up, exclaiming, "I've got to get down there!"
Whoa, friend.
She caught my sleeve.
You want to be locked up again?
You don't understand. He's going to kill us unless I can... I stammered, hearing how I sounded, and catching a glimpse of myself in the mirror behind the bar. A raving lunatic with a crow's nest of disheveled hair. Bags under the bags in my eyes. Oh. Suddenly self-conscious, I patted my hair down. Look, Lily, I know I sound... That is, I know how I sound, but... There was nothing for it but to drink myself to oblivion. Boarding the ship had been a mistake. I couldn't prevent my own prophecies from coming to pass. But I persisted. But could I have your number? In case any of what I've foreseen comes true. Lily's eyebrows crawled up to her hairline. I'd seen that look before, enough to know when it was time to show myself out. I was about to leave when she took out her phone, asked for my number, and texted me.
Hi, it's Lily Tsuki.
She even used a little flower and moon emoji. Cute. I stared at her message, stunned. She squeezed my shoulder and remarked,
Not too many death warnings, please. Actually, this whole thing you've got going kind of reminds me of a movie. Tell me if you get it.
More passengers had filtered into the lounge. Lily returned to her piano, and from behind the keys, called into the mic,
This one's for the psychic lady in the crowd. Here's to you, friend.
When she played the opening bars to Mad World, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. But oh, she had me pegged. I raised my glass. Hard to believe only 24 hours ago I'd been so full of giddy delight as I arrived at the terminal. Already, it felt like a lifetime. And even though nothing I could do would save us all, for a brief moment, something flickered in my chest. Not hope, exactly, but one sweet moment to savor as I downed my drink and watched Lily play against the backdrop of the ocean. A single incandescent memory, like a candle before it's snuffed into the darkness.
Pool deck.
After I left the bar, shrieks drew me up to the pool deck. Turned out to be a party. People throwing each other into the chlorinated water. Over at the patio, John's bloated corpse leaked fluids into a foul puddle. Everywhere, the smell had intensified, the decay continuing. I noted that the teen boy who yesterday swam through his own corpse was now wearing the trunks he'd die in. I made preparations, nicking bottles from the bar. Would decapitation slow Passenger X? Would burning his corpse? What I really wished for was a machete. But I only found steak knives that I snuck into my bag, and matches and rags. We'd see how the dead man would stand up to a Molotov. You know this is hopeless, right? You've never lit a Molotov. Ignoring my inner voice of doom, I readied the alcohol in my cabin's bathroom. It being the only relatively small room to which I had access and could contain a corpse while I burned it. This could wind up being a very bad idea, of course, since I might end up using all these bottles I'd collected for my own barbecue. Sitting on my charred sofa, my own crispy corpse served as a vivid reminder. A dead, smoky Cassandra, illustrating the inescapability of my prophecies. Hope is a thing with feathers. I said like a mantra and scribbled a note. I left it beside my corpse, tapped my blackened forehead, and added, "Remember, fire and ice." God, I'd lost it. If I'd ever had it. I plugged in my phone and charged the batteries of my flashlight. The last hues of orange and red were fading to purple twilight. I dared not go below again searching for Passenger X, and risk being detained. My best bet was to check in at the piano lounge at the end of Lily's shift. See if I could convince her to let me escort her to staff quarters on the lower decks. I could keep her safe while simultaneously searching for Passenger X. But she'd be playing until after midnight. At that moment, a tremendous fatigue swept over me. I'd been operating on high adrenaline, anxious and terrified, and barely slept at all in the past 24 hours. My lids were suddenly, horrifyingly heavy. My body was going to take a rest, whether I willed or no, I realized. So, I returned to my lounger on the pool deck, set my alarm, and closed my eyes, intending only for a short nap. I plunged into a deep and dreamless sleep.
6:17 a.m.
I woke up both well-rested and sensing that something was horribly, terribly wrong. My heart picked up pace when I understood why. The engines, they were silent. There was no wind gusting over me, tugging my hair and clothes and spoiling my rest. In the distant sky, pink lightened the horizon. Dawn? I'd slept through till dawn. Snatched my phone, but it was dead as a brick. No wonder it hadn't woken me. But the battery had been fully charged. Even as I registered this, my brain picked up on another sound. An announcement over the PA system, over and over.
For safety reasons, we request all passengers to remain in their cabins. The ship's firefighting team is fighting the fire. I repeat, for safety reasons, we request all passengers to remain in their cabins.
Thick and dark against the dawn, a column of smoke rose from the stern. The Sea Star was dead in the water. With no engines, the cruise ship was now a floating death trap for everyone aboard. And soon would be a vessel full of corpses. Snatching up my bag, I ascended to the jogging track for a better view. At this hour, there weren't many passengers on deck, and the few I spotted were retreating to their cabins. There was no sense of hurry or alarm, though I noted a few teen girls trying to video the smoke, and exclaiming with dismay about their phones. They called out to a young man who joined their group, only to discover his phone was dead too. All of them hurried below decks after a goateed crewman barked a warning at them. "Hey you!" The same crewman spotted me, waving me down. As I approached, his radio handset spat static.
He's eating her face! He's eating her!
Quickly, the crewman silenced it, tucking it into his pocket and snapping at me to go to my cabin before charging inside and down the forward stairwell. That radio message. Passenger X? Slipping my flashlight from my bag into my hand, I hurried after the goateed crewman, only to stop in the forward stairwell when the stench hit me like a tsunami. I remembered the pile of rotting carcasses blocking the way down. The bodies were so deep into decomposition I could smell them leaking foul fluid. Even through my perfumed bandana, my lungs spasmed. But that radio message, I had to go through them. Holding my nose, I gripped the stairwell railing and barreled down the steps. They're not real. They're not real. My feet galloped along the carpet until my heel plunged into a squelchy mess, and I stumbled. Flashlight bouncing through their bodies as my vision of the future dissolved under my tumble. I thudded down the stairs and came to a jarring halt. The breath slammed out of me. Pushed myself up on the putrid-soaked carpet. Pain shot through my hip and shoulder, but nothing was broken. I thanked my brother for all the falling practice in Aikido classes we'd taken, which I continued until around the same time I gave up the name Hope. Luckily, the reflexes persisted. But I'd lost track of the crewman. Picking my way through the dim, I was just about to turn back towards the stern when radio static crackled from the closed doors of the cabaret lounge. A little prickle sent the hairs on my neck standing on end. I didn't like that I could hear the radio, but no crewman. I crept to the doors and gripped the handle. Peeked my head in. Chairs, stage, bloated corpses. So where was the radio coming from? Had I imagined it? There it was again! The room's acoustics made it difficult to pinpoint the sound, but it seemed to be down near the stage. I ducked inside the door, crouched low, and inched to the equipment booth. From there, I had a good view down the aisle. Cast in dawn's rosy light through the wide windows, the theater was almost picturesque. Were it not for the rotting corpses, their faces contorted in agony, and an inexplicable dread that curdled in my belly because I still could not pinpoint that radio. Just the empty stage, the empty rows of chairs. It was definitely close to the stage. I'd have to get nearer. The chairs at the front blocked my view. Every hair on end, every instinct shrieking, I crept down the aisle. My heart bounced in panicky flutters. I paused at the base of the stage and scanned the corpses. A leaky old man slumped on a table, mouth open in a groan. A few more bent over chairs, grinning. A couple of women in red dresses. one splotchy skin near the stage, the other partially hidden under the curtains, and one corpse seated in an audience chair with his head thrown back, teeth bared in an agonizing grimace through his goatee. I recognized him by his uniform. So that was how the goateed crewman would wind up. But no trace of his radio. Please. The whisper was so faint I barely registered it. I leaned forward, and there, behind his seated corpse, huddled in a fetal position below the chair, hands cupped to his ears and eyes squeezed shut, was the living crewman, rocking and bashing his head on the carpet. I started to rise, and the squeak of my shoes brought his head snapping up, his eyes fixed on me. "Passengers return to cabins," he said through clenched teeth. "Passengers return." Who did this to you? Was it the man they pulled from the ocean? What exactly did he— "Passengers return!" He burst again. His face spasmed and suddenly his eyes rounded, wide in terror. It was an expression of such panic that I felt goosebumps rise up my arms, and I involuntarily stepped back as he stretched a hand out toward me. Then he said, The radio.
Deck 9. We need support on Deck 9. Passengers.
It was behind me. Arms encircled my neck. I dropped automatically onto one knee, flipping my assailant forward over my shoulder. A snarling face and hissing, bloodied mouth flashed through my view, and the flutter of a red dress. One of the corpses? Oh, God. The corpse from beneath the curtains. Fuck! I cried, scrambling backwards. A corpse attacking me? How? How could a corpse— The radio! She had it in her hand. A corpse from 6 days in the future couldn't pick up a radio in the here and now. And the blood that dribbled from her lips as she leered at me— fresh blood. Oh. You idiot, Cass. The woman had only been pretending to be dead, lying under the curtain until I turned my attention to the crewman. Her mouth widened in a grin, full of blood from chewing her own tongue, and from attacking the crewman who was still on his knees clutching his ear and whimpering. It hadn't been Passenger X at all. The contagion was spreading among the passengers now. I backed up, fumbling in my bag. The woman chucked the radio at me, and it struck the floor and broke apart behind me as I ducked. My fingers found the handle of a knife. The woman lunged. I flung a chair at her, which she knocked aside. Instinct seized control of my limbs as I slashed with the knife. Once, twice, cutting her swiping arms but only eliciting giggles. And then I lunged, ramming the blade deep up into her neck, under her chin. A horrible gurgling sound. The woman took a few staggering steps backward, clawing at the handle, And then she collapsed, twitching in front of me on the carpet. She crawled towards the stage, finally dying in the spot her corpse from my visions currently occupied 6 days into the future. That's why I'd seen 2 women in red dresses. The same woman. Before I stabbed her, and after. Oh God. Oh my God. I'd done a lot of things before, but never actually killed. Never been directly responsible for any of the corpses I've come across. Her hot blood had spurted all over my hands and face. I tasted the salt and copper on my tongue. The horror hit me in a flood of nausea. Suddenly ill, I staggered away from her and heaved. Everywhere I touched left smears of red. Down by the stage, the crewman was hitting his head against the wooden floor. Through my numbness, a single thought penetrated. Lily. If it was already happening here, how bad was it below? The crewman's head turned towards me as I grabbed my bag. The voices. They're telling me to do things. The voices. His terrified eyes locked on mine. Run! As I fled, my last glimpse was of him sobbing, curled up on the floor in a ball. I didn't know claustrophobia. Didn't get darkness. Until I was trapped in the underbelly of a doomed ship. With no windows, no light, no access. It feels like there's no air. Like being sealed in a submarine deep below the surface. The kind of hopeless situation where you can shut off your flashlight and hide, hoping none of the contagious lunatics happen to stumble across you in the pitch, hoping for a chance to escape. But where? With no windows or doors, and the elevator out of power? And the only way out is to make it through a maze of corridors in complete blackness, hoping to find a stairwell, the same stairwell everyone else is trying to reach. When you're alone in the dark, hearing the screams, that escape route might as well be a world away. See, I had no idea the horror that lurked below when I rushed downstairs to the lower decks to search for Lily. Screams resounded from all directions. Crew, rushing around and frantic, didn't even pay attention to me as I dashed through the corridors calling for Lily and swinging my flashlight. To them, the lights were still on. Presumably running on auxiliary power since the elevators and engines were out. But to me, seeing the ship as it would look 6 days in the future, dead bodies littered the floor and crimson splashed the walls. But judging by the shrieks, the present wasn't that far from catching up. An alarm was sounding. For fire or crew muster or some other emergency. Everywhere was chaos, as staff tried to contain those who, like the goateed crewman and the woman in the red dress, had gone mad. The contagion seemed to be spreading exponentially. My shoes slipped on something slick, and I flicked my flashlight downward. Amidst the old, dried blood from my vision was also a patch of fresh, glistening red. Panic shot through me, and in my sticky, bloodied hands, the beam jittered. In this pandemonium, how was I ever going to find...
You.
A hand snatched me out of the dark. Cold.
You. What's going on?
Lily burst, wild-eyed. Oh, thank God. I gasped, relieved she'd found me. It's some sort of contagion, madness.
It got my bunkmate.
Lily spoke with wild, bloodshot eyes.
I woke up and she was peeling off her nails. At first, I thought they were press-ons, but her fingers were all bloody.
Her hands shook. There was no trace of her glittering makeup or carefree persona. Her voice squeaked with panic.
I shut her in the bathroom. I closed the door and she went back to whatever she was doing to herself. If you hadn't warned me.
At that moment, the overhead lights flickered on. I winced under the sudden brightness of the fluorescent lighting, snatched in a deep breath as the putrid stench and the corpses along the corridor vanished. The walls returned to white. Passenger X was somewhere nearby, drawing my vision into the present moment. My eyes swept the hallway, across the people rushing here and there down at the far end. Then I turned, and Lily and I saw him at the same moment, standing just behind us. Missing an eye, which now dangled out of his head. Apparently, he'd been in some tussles with the security staff. I slid off my backpack. A few streaks of red on the walls, I noted, stayed there even with the lights on. It was real now. I pulled out a bottle.
Passengers remain in your cabin for security reasons.
The intercom blared. It had been going for a while now.
Wait further instructions.
And then, a flurry of voices. An argument. Abruptly, a new voice announced.
All passengers report to your muster stations. This is not a drill. Prepare for immediate evacuation. All passengers.
Suddenly, the intercom cut out. The ship plunged into total darkness. Screams, shrieks from near and far, including a gasp from Lily. Her cold fingers clutched my arm. It wasn't just me who couldn't see anymore. The auxiliary power, which had been maintaining the electric lights in the PA system after the engine fire, had been cut. The present had finally caught up to my visions. The Sea Star was in total blackout.
Lower decks.
Shrieks resounded throughout the ship's underbelly, mingled with sobs and shouts and, more disturbingly, laughter. The sudden complete darkness was suffocating, smothering, absolute. And though it had always been dark for me, to have it be dark in reality for everyone was a different experience. Panic suffused the air. A primal, choking fear that rang out with every cry and penetrated to my marrow. I could almost feel the blackness like a weight crawling along my flesh. And I could smell the sweat and fear This was true darkness. My flashlight skittered across the bloodied walls, searching for Passenger X, but in the sudden pitch, he'd vanished. I caught only the scattered movement of crew and staff throughout the distant corridor. Crew members' flashlights winked on, and someone shouted, "Lock it, lock it. Don't let them out."
What do we do?
Lily's voice skimmed the edge of hysteria. At least, I hoped it was hysteria. Her bunkmate was infected. Oh, Lord. What if this is how it all goes down? Lily goes mad and I have to kill her? No. Hope is the thing with feathers. We've got to get upstairs, I said, clutching at straws. Evacuate,
Light!
shrilled a voice. A woman in crew uniform bolted at us, cackling hysterically. She seized the flashlight before I could react. For a few seconds, I struggled with her and nearly had the light free when the woman sank her teeth into my hand. I screamed. Thick, muscled arms wrapped around her out of the dark as I yanked the flashlight back. One of the security staff hauled her away, barking into his radio.
Got another one.
To Lily and I, he shouted, Go! Evacuate! The main stairwell was behind him, but clamorous figures shouted from that direction. We retreated toward the bow. I glanced over my shoulder, briefly swinging the light back. Another crewman hustled over to the security guard's aid. Or so I thought, until he lunged, pressing his mouth to the other man's ear. Licking? Whispering something? As the two men fought, the woman broke free and rushed after us. Run! I shoved Lily. We ran. Our footsteps pounded along the concrete, the flashlight's beam bouncing up and down as the cackling woman chased us.
Forward stairwell!
Panted Lily. No! I seized her arm, yanking her into one of the intersecting corridors off the main highway and through the nearest door, shutting off my light and clapping a hand to her mouth. In pitch darkness, we huddled against the door. Just outside, cackles of the woman who had been chasing us receded somewhere into the distance. Slowly, I removed my hand from Lily's mouth, leaned my lips to her ear, and whispered, "The forward stairwell is a death trap. Crowds fleeing above and below will trample each other." A flash of crushed bodies in my brain, the overwhelming smell. God. We'd have been dead if we went that way. Shrieks and pounding footsteps reverberated in the distance. The chaos was spreading. Judging by the clamor, a whole mass of people were fleeing towards the forward stairs. We both stiffened again as the cackling woman passed by outside the door. We'd have to escape either via the aft stairs at the opposite end of the ship, so far from here they may as well have been on Mars, or the central stairs. The central stairwell was the widest, harboring very few corpses according to my explorations. But to reach it, we'd have to head to the highway. And the chaos along that thoroughfare, where infection continued its spread. No. I flicked on the flashlight. Where are we? Hope flared. The infirmary. We were at the rear of the medical area, near a restroom and lab room. Down the hallway lay the examination rooms. The front entrance of the infirmary lobby led right to the elevator bay and central stairs. All we had to do was get through here.
I should have listened to you.
Lily's choking sob shattered the silence.
Oh God, I shouldn't have taken this gig.
Shh. Hey. She slid down the door, palms pressed against her eyes, and I squeezed her shoulder. Stop that. I didn't stay on board this doomed ship to leave you here in the dark. Get up.
Why did you stay?
She sniffled, palms still pressed to her face.
You knew this would happen.
For you, nitwit. And the rest of the passengers. To try to stop all this. I shrugged awkwardly. Obviously failed. My predictions always come true, unfortunately.
How do I die?
Dunno. Old age? I never saw your corpse. Liar. You touched her hand. You know she dies. But that wasn't exactly motivating. I squeezed her shoulder again. The infirmary was quiet, but from what I could remember, not entirely safe. I leaned down and whispered, "Now, I'm going to get us out of here. But there is at least one infected in here."
How?
Began Lily, but bit off her question, accepting my statement. I considered the flashlight. There were at least 2 people who would die here. The nurse who treated me in the examination room, and the secretary at the front desk. Given the state of the nurse's body, jammed under the table, she was murdered by someone else. But the secretary... I shuddered at the memory of her toothless face. And I may have missed decaying bodies hidden in closets or behind closed doors. I navigated this area mostly in the dark the first time I was here. The light will have to be off, or it'll draw attention. I think I can get us through without bumping into anything.
In the pitch black?
Just follow.
What if we run into one of them?
Shh. I know where all the corpses are. I switched off the light. The hysterical edge to her breathing ratcheted up. When I took her hand, her grip on mine was cold. So cold. Like pulling a corpse straight out of a grave. I edged along the hall, feeling the wall for the door frames. Exam room 1. Exam room 2. At the 3rd room, I stopped. A faint whimper sounded from beyond the doorframe. Weeping? The voice of a frightened woman. A dilemma raged within me. A battle between self-preservation and altruism. Finally, careful to keep myself between Lily and whoever was inside, I faced the exam room and flicked on the flashlight. Hunched under the table was the nurse who'd rendered my exam. She'd lost her hijab, was clutching a dead phone and a napkin, sobbing and terrified, and, much to her misfortune, sane. I held out a hand and whispered, "We're going to the lifeboats. Come on." She shook her head and recoiled. I moved in, tried to get closer, but she whimpered,
Go away. Go away. You're not exactly a comforting figure.
Lily whispered in my ear. Was this any time for sass? Ignoring her, I said, "It's all right. We'll help. Take my hand." I jumped at the sudden, loud sob that emitted from her and snapped my light off, backing into Lily and fumbling for my knife. For some seconds, we huddled together in the darkness, holding our breaths. But the only sound was the nurse's weeping. Slowly, the tension bled out of me. How I wanted to save her. That poor girl. But I didn't dare risk making any more noise. We still had to cross the lobby, and I didn't know where we'd encounter the secretary. If the coast is clear, we'll come back again, I told myself, taking Lily's frozen hand again. But of course, the coast would not be clear. The flashlight's beam into the room had been brief, but enough to show me under the table, next to the huddled nurse, her decomposing corpse. She would die there. The guilt was a hand squeezing my heart, crushing it into a stone as we rounded the corner of the hallway, leaving the quiet sobbing behind us. A faint illumination shone in the lobby waiting room. A flashlight, its beam moving irregularly. A strange sort of giggle, or maybe sob, drifted to the air. Lily's fingers tightened on mine. I steadied the knife in my hand and led us closer to the waiting area. That dancing and irregular light casting the chairs into rollicking shapes. It wasn't a bright light, but we'd still have to be careful to keep out of its range. And now that we were almost into the lobby waiting area, I could hear the secretary more clearly. Something clinked into the trash can. A tooth. My heart raced like a hummingbird's wings. Hope is the thing with feathers. If I can save even one life. I squeezed Lily's cold fingers and then laid a hand on her shoulder and pressed. Stay. Hoping she understood, I disengaged myself from her. When the flashlight moved away from the edge of the darkness where we stood, I stepped out and lunged at the secretary's desk. An unholy screech pierced the air. She shot to her feet. My knife plunged into her eye, right through to her brain. I snatched up the tiny emergency flashlight she'd been using while she pried her teeth out. I caught the glimpse of her bloodied jaw and pliers on the desk. I jerked the knife out from her, the eyeball still attached. Whirled, swinging the light, at the ready, but no other assaults came. I'd been correct in my assumptions. There were only 2 deaths here. Aiming the light at Lily, I said, "Quick!" and hustled us back to examination room 3. The nurse again shied back from us, but this time Lily took the lead. And, after a few minutes of speaking quietly to the nurse in a hushed voice, managed to draw her with us. Even 1 life. Maybe we had only delayed her fate, and she'd end up back here under the table. Maybe. But hell if I was going to make it easy for fate to have its way. From the main entrance of the infirmary, we made it out to the stairwell at last, and back up to the passenger decks, where a dim, foggy light greeted us from the windows. A couple of grim-faced crew in life jackets stood near the concierge desk, ushering passengers up the grand staircase, urging everyone to bring only necessities and proceed in an orderly fashion. Passengers scurried out of cabins all along the corridors, some laden with luggage and laptop bags, others more pragmatically with only bottled water. Nervous security staff kept watch over the stairwell down to the lower decks, from which the shrieks of the infected reverberated along the narrow corridors. With each shout ringing from below, panic rippled through the crowd. Everyone was hyper-aware of the spreading infection. The infirmary nurse we'd pulled from the lower decks quickly deserted us to join the flood of people. I started to follow, but Lily nudged me and raised her eyebrows, giving my hand a significant glance.
You, might want to clean that and put it away.
Huh? Oh! I was still clutching my knife, bloody from my encounter with one of the infected, an eyeball skewered on its tip. Horrified, I quickly wiped it off on a napkin from my pocket, tucked the knife into my jacket, and tried my best to wipe my bloodied hands clean. No wonder other passengers were giving us anxious looks in a wide berth. If not for Lily's presence, the security staff monitoring the stairs likely would have never let us through. Ugh. I winced as I scrubbed, finally noticing the bite wound. I hadn't felt it during all the adrenaline rush of our escape from the infirmary. But now it throbbed, oozing blood. I sought a clean rag from my bag. Security staff hovered nearby, eyeing me. Lily bound the wound and quietly asked,
Are you infected?
"Hmm? Oh, no, it's not that kind of contagion. It's more like, possession. It spreads through whispers. And it can affect electronics, even warp concrete. I don't know how exactly, but it's like my eyes. Supernatural."
So that man they pulled in was a ghost from the sea? A vengeful spirit?
No idea. My eyes don't see ghosts. Just death.
Just death?
Yeah. I am attuned to death. She'd finished tying my hand and used another rag to try to get at the blood on my face. I'd forgotten about that too. I smoothed my hair and tried to look like less of a murderous lunatic. Wriggled my fingers in an awkward wave at the security guard and asked Lily, "Right. How do I look?" She squinted.
Just about your normal.
"Good," I said, before my brain caught up to my mouth and realized what this implied about my normal. What? Okay, this felt like a lot of shade coming from someone I'd just hauled out of the contagion-filled underbelly of the ship. I scrunched my brow, about to retort, when we both heard it. The shriek of a thin, high voice. Passengers wept and sobbed as they thronged past us. Panicky babble filled the air. But this was different. A child's voice. I looked to the security staff monitoring the stairs to see if any of them had registered the shriek, but they had moved off to deal with another unruly passenger. None of the other evacuees were paying attention. And, of course, Lily went after the cry. Unlike me, she hadn't suffered years of failure to inure her to the fact that the deaths I predicted were inevitable. Also, I hadn't told her that our own expiration dates were rapidly approaching. That our escape from below meant nothing, and we were as doomed as all these other passengers. Soon, maybe right now, following her to the sound of the child's cry, I'd get infected, go mad, and set myself on fire. But there was no sense trying to dissuade her. What I'd learned in my 40 years was that all roads lead to the future I foresaw. I followed her past the elevator bay and down to the last cabin on the port side. The wail could be heard more distinctly now, above the general din. Then came the sound of a woman's laughter. Low and throaty. Shrilled the child's voice.
Hello? Do you need help?
The throaty laughter abruptly stopped, though the child's wailing continued. I tensed, every muscle coiled. As footsteps approached the door, Lily's eyes flicked to me, signaling me to be ready. I sort of wanted to press pause on this moment and explain to her that a few lucky strikes didn't make me some kind of Buffy the Infected Slayer. But now, the door was cracking open. Mother Ducker. I gripped my knife. The door slowly creaked inward, revealing a cabin in disarray. The gray light from the ocean view window falling on discarded clothes, a shattered mirror, and a small boy huddled by the bed. A bright green backpack beside him, packed with children's versions of emergency supplies. He clung to the straps, red-faced and weeping, while Lily pushed the door until the knob bumped the wall. No trace of the woman with the throaty laugh. I swept into the room. The rush of blood in my ears pounded like drums as I peeked around the bed and into the bathroom. The boy couldn't have been more than 5 years old, his voice hitching in a whimper when I passed by him with my knife. His fear only subsiding when Lily knelt beside him and cooed in her soft, musical voice.
Shh. It's all right. Is that your bag for evacuation? I'm Lily. What's your name? Benjamin.
The softest whisper of sliding wood sent spiders skittering up my spine. A wild-haired woman lunged out of the closet. I slammed into her as Lily grabbed the boy and ducked away. My knife cut into her shoulder. Her fingers raked my cheek. And then, suddenly, she embraced me, her tongue snaking inside my ear. I gasped at the sensation, a cold that went straight through my inner ear with her whispered words. I couldn't even make out what she said. All hissing and slurring. Then, I slammed my head forward, into the bridge of her nose, knocking her into the closet. While the woman was fighting to disentangle herself from all the hangers and clothes, I fled the cabin after Lily and Benjamin, grabbing the door handle behind us and dragging it shut. I held it tight, but the woman did not try to open it. Instead, the low, throaty laughter resumed inside. Then, the sound of tinkling, shattering, a repetitive, dull thudding. She was banging her head against the glass. Releasing the door, I sank to my knees and cupped a hand to my ear, trying to shake the cold out.
The shards. Mirror. So pretty. Tinkling.
The voices were like a wind blowing just inside my left ear, where she'd licked it.
You okay, friend? Hey.
Lily knelt beside me. There's something cold in my... I grabbed my head. I can hear them. The voices.
Oh God.
Her grip tightened on my shoulder.
This is all my fault.
I shook my head. No, you're not at fault. This was already going to happen. Already know how I die. Have known since I got on the ship. It's nothing to do with you.
What?
Lily looked horrified, but then the boy whined.
Mama?
At the door, she snatched his hand before he could open the cabin, pulled him near, and tried to placate him. I forced myself to stand. The whole ship seemed to tilt under me, as if suddenly I could feel the water's current just beneath its belly. But I managed not to totter over. Come on. Let's get going. Get you both to the lifeboats. Promenade deck. Lily and Benjamin had to climb the stairs slowly to accommodate me. Most of the passengers had already mustered on Deck 5 for evacuation, so we were virtually alone on the grand staircase. I clung to the railing for balance, pausing every few moments to try to shake water out of my ear. The whispers.
I will die, die, die. No escaping.
Merged into my own inner doubts now, echoing the dread I'd harbored ever since I boarded. A soft susurrus of
Fate, fate, fate. Death is fate. Come on, friend. Just a little further.
Lily grabbed my hand, and I gasped. For an instant, I forgot about the voices. Forgot everything except the soft feel of her fingers in mine. Because her hand, it was warm. Hope flared, fluttered in my ribs as we climbed the last few steps up the grand staircase, out into the cafe on deck 5. But then, just as suddenly, the hope flickered, sputtered, and died. Because the smell. I ripped off the handkerchief I'd been wearing over my face to muffle the stench of rot. The aroma of coffee and pastries wafted to my nostrils. I whirled, checking for the bloodstains on the cafe rug, which had been there since the very first day. It was gone. The cafe was pristine, other than a few chairs knocked out of place. The scent of coffee grounds made my mouth water, and my stomach rumbled at the pastries in their glass case. My vision! I can't see the future anymore. Couldn't see it. Couldn't smell it. Couldn't feel it in my cold hands. My own fingers were warm, the injured hand throbbing with coagulated blood. Yanking free from Lily, I tugged out my phone, illuminating myself with the flashlight and staring at my reflection on the screen. My eyes, they were no longer pitch black. At the center of the pupil shone an eerie, glowing light. And from my ear, spider webbing? I turned my head, pawing at the glowing strand that flowed into the ear. It felt cool, almost like a thread of luminescent water. As I turned my head, I caught a glimpse of the thread stretching downward, past the banister of the grand staircase. Do you see that? I called to Lily and the boy, but they only looked at me with wide, worried eyes. Of course they didn't see. That glowing strand was like my visions, something only I could perceive. Only now, I wasn't glimpsing the future. I was glimpsing the power of Passenger X. I realized something else, too, as I bobbled my head to observe that glowing strand. It carried the whispers into my ear. When I looked up again, Lily and the boy were backing away.
You're going mad.
Yep. The price I paid for staying. I saw my charred corpse the first day. I'll be going to my cabin to set fire to myself in a moment. Fate, fate, fate. Go, I said, beckoning them towards the promenade deck doors. Escape. I stayed to make sure you and others could evacuate. I'll keep an eye out for Passenger X. As long as you get out of his reach, escape the Sea Star, you'll survive. Lies, lies, lies. Everyone dies. Go. I repeated, gritting my teeth against the voices. Lily looked sadly at me, but nodded and drew Benjamin with her through the doors. I followed them several steps behind. Outside, crowds were already loading onto the lifeboats under the lifeless, foggy morning sky. As my gaze tracked Lily and Benjamin, the sea breeze hit me. A ray of sun shone through the clouds. Hope. A crewman spotted Lily and the boy and waved them over, calling out to the crowd to prioritize families. And as they stepped forward to accept a couple of life jackets, ice shot through my veins, rushing from the base of my skull through every part of me as I saw. Oh, I saw. That silvery glowing filament that whispered into my ear. There were dozens of glowing threads just like it. Dozens. They stretched throughout the crowd. Infected passengers mingling with regular people, blending in. And as I touched one of the lines, its whispers roared into my mind. Fingers, 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 bite the fingers. I touched another nearby. What if I tore out her scalp? When I board, I'll start tearing. And then I lunged. Lily cried out as I yanked her back.
Hey, what are you?
Stop! I hissed. Lily's brow scrunched, teeth gritting.
Let go.
No. Yes, you foresaw this. Lily. I went on, ignoring the voices. You can't board. He's not going to let any of those lifeboats make it safely back.
What?
My grip was a vice, dragging her closer to me as I whispered. It's not an evacuation. It's a trap. The horror of it sent fresh waves of ice down my spine. Lily clearly thought I'd lost it, and I burst, trembling with frustration. I told you. This isn't a virus. There's intention behind it, directing it. There are people in this crowd still in the early stages. Everyone on board those lifeboats will be infected by them. And when they're rescued, the infection will spread. Do you understand, Lily? What you'll be if you board? Those passengers fleeing, they aren't the survivors. He's letting them go. Realization slowly dawned on her, and she shook her head, eyes going wide, fingers white-knuckled on the boy's hand. There aren't any survivors. No. There are only hosts. So, this is my last entry. Before I finish and explain the fate of all those who were left aboard the Sea Star, I want to apologize. Especially to anyone who had a friend or loved one aboard the Sea Star. Truly, I am sorry for all the lives lost. And especially the lives I knowingly and willingly took. I have tried and failed to find any good way of describing what infection feels like. By the time I stood on the deck with Lily, the whispers coursing into my brain had become so deafening that I could scarcely hear the din as the crowd surged, screams echoing with maddened passengers swarming from the aft stairwell. Well, security and crew fought to keep them back. I suspect the chaos was Passenger X's attempt at distraction. I just exclaimed to Lily the dangers of infected passengers boarding the lifeboats. And there was a chance that we might have rallied and convinced the crew to screen everyone before evacuation. But there was no chance of that now, with panic driving people in a stampede. Several of the aggressive infected were quite near us, and Lily cried.
What should we do?
Fate, fate. As predicted, all equally dead. Dead can't escape fate.
It's taking me. I gasped. I probably would have succumbed right there, and let the madness stroll me down to my cabin for a barbecue. Had Lily not hauled me and Benjamin through the panic tide, somehow getting us upstairs and into a cabin. Leaving me on the floor by the door, she took Benjamin to the sofa and fastened his life jacket, ruffled through his green backpack, and found a small pool floaty that she inflated for him. Then she rushed to the balcony, scanning the outdoors. Suddenly jerked back as shrieks rang out from above. And she yanked the balcony door closed and drew the curtains shut. We're all going to die. It's foreseen. Can't prevent.
Fate!
I curled on the floor, head in my hands.
We're safe here. We'll just wait for help to come.
Lily reassured Benjamin. It seemed her plan was to wait out the crisis, hoping the Coast Guard would find the Sea Star and locate any survivors. However, there was a problem with her plan. Not all the infected were outside. After all, I was still in here.
Friend, I have to ask. Are you going to turn on us?
Fate. 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 She rubbed her face, wiping tears from her eyes. Tears for me? A flutter in my chest? Then I realized she was holding my knife. Oh. Of course. I was a danger to them after all. She gripped me by the collar, lifted me toward her, and then she opened her hand, dropping the knife, and slapped me hard.
Snap out of it!
Lily barked as I clutched my cheek. The voices were still whispering,
Fate, fate, fate.
but she shook me hard enough to rattle my teeth.
Don't listen to the voices. You said burning yourself alive in your cabin is the price you pay to stay and help us survive, right? But we're not safe. So you're not finished yet. You, of all the people in the world, are on this ship, friend. Remember what I told you that first night? If this is the Titanic, you're the only one who can see the iceberg. So use those special eyes and see.
And maybe it was because her face was so close to mine, her disheveled hair brushing my forehead. I became acutely aware of my own heartbeat. That reminded me of what my brother said. That hope was the thing with feathers. That fluttering in my ribs. Hope? See the iceberg. Of course. I couldn't see the future anymore. All I could see now was the filaments. But the filaments, they were almost like spider webbing. I turned my head, following the trail of that glowing strand out of my ear, ignoring Lily's question of, hey, are you still with me? I remembered how I'd seen dozens of those strands on deck, how they all converged below. And suddenly I understood what was at their center, like the spider lurking in its web. I have to go. Lily drew back.
Okay, what are you going to?
If I can destroy Passenger X, that might free the infected people. I paused, wincing as the voices changed to laughter. When had I ever succeeded in changing fate before? I'll probably fail, I admitted. So in case that happens, Lily, you are going to have to take Benjamin and jump.
What? But...
You've got to. Your only hope is to get away from the Sea Star. As soon as the lifeboats have moved away from the ship, you and Benjamin jump from the balcony. Make sure your life jackets are on tight. Bring that inflatable thing with you, and once you hit the water, no matter what the crew or anyone else tells you, do not climb into any life rafts. There are infected on board those vessels. Even if people seem to be behaving normally, wait until the Coast Guard arrives. The only chance you have is if you stay in the water. Do you understand? Lily nodded. It was unlikely she'd survive. After all, her hands had been cold. But this was the best I could do. I drew a breath. Good luck, Lily, Benjamin. I turned away, shouldering my bag and reaching for the door, when Lily called back.
Wait, friend.
I looked up, and she asked softly,
What is your name?
I think I must have looked at her very blankly, because she added,
I mean, I know you from the bar, but your nickname is... Well, it's drinks like a fish and tips well. We were never properly introduced.
She spread her hands and repeated,
What's your actual name?
Only in that moment did I realize that her calling me friend this whole time had not been some cordial acknowledgement of familiarity, but just the opposite. For all the shows I'd enjoyed and tipped, I truly was wallpaper to her. Had never registered enough for her to learn who I was, and her calling me friend was just a chummy way of addressing a stranger. Oh, I said, blinked. I think I chuckled. Maybe I sighed. Cass, Cassandra, Kea. But you can just call me Drinks Like a Fish and Tips Well.
Good luck, Cass.
Lily looked guilty. If I had to guess, she intended to ask Roy from the bar about my name, but hadn't gotten an answer before circumstances went sideways. No matter, Lily. Names don't matter much anyways to the dead, which we will all soon be. Beginning with me.
Highway.
After leaving Lily and the boy, I descended to the cabaret lounge, loading my bag with more bottles and rags, fully expecting to fight my way down to the lower decks. And yet, none of the people I spotted on the stairs seemed to take much interest in me. In fact, the only close encounter I had was when I descended the grand staircase, pausing to make eye contact with a gentleman at the cafe who had just stabbed his wife in the eye with a dessert spoon. He looked at me, examined the eyeball, and swallowed it. Seemed to consider my eyes for a minute, as if wondering how they might taste, but then turned back to the twitching body of his wife. I heard him call gleefully to me, "Care for a treat." I shook my head and continued downward, and he returned to her, scooping the other eye out into a teacup, then rising and meandering in search of another victim as the filament pulsated in his ear, and I heard it whisper,
More eyes on the lifeboat. Bring them as more eyes.
Then I was on the stairwell to the lower decks with my flashlight, following the glowing strands into the bowels of the ship. In the long corridor dubbed the highway, blood glistened across the walls and floor. I stepped over a young man, moaning for help.
Idiot.
I thought. Dying is your fate. And then he was there, standing right in front of me in the highway, the dark figure at the center of the web of strands. Passenger X. Teeth bared in that same grin. His tongue, I realized, was chewed to bits, and he was still chewing on it. Disgusted, I reached into my bag, pulled out one of my Molotovs, and lit it. The dead man only grinned as I took aim, and threw. His teeth clacked. For a second, everything seemed to slow, as if the ship itself inhaled. The strands curled in a glowing web around him, and then a shockwave outward. Ripples in the concrete floor. Oh, I thought. That's where that came from. I'd forgotten about the damage in the highway, forgotten how he could crack and warp concrete as well as interfere with electronics. Then I slammed into the wall. The bottles in my bag all shattered. My flashlight skittered away and winked out. Glass bit into my palms as I tried to sit upright. And the dead man was suddenly on top of me, his weight pinning me. I rammed my forehead into him, only for him to shove me back to the concrete. Glass tangled my hair and bit into my skull. I felt his lips on my cheek, mangled tongue seeking. But it's already got me. Flashed through my mind. Then, his mouth was on mine, his dead, mutilated tongue in my throat, and I gagged, flailing, drowning. The whispers were a roar, filling me up inside. All those glowing strands flowing into me. I felt my body jerk, contort, with the whispers raging through me. Suddenly, he went limp. I hurled him away and sat up, and spit out bits of the dead man's flesh. And then I stood, fumbling in the darkness, slipping on the concrete slick with spilled alcohol and broken glass. And then I saw everything.
The Azure Sea Star.
My glowing eyes went wide. I gaped at the sight of a woman beneath my hands, screaming as I jammed my thumb into her eyeball. The taste of severed fingers in my mouth. The cold metal of the balcony rail as I climbed over it and scrambled forward to snarl at the cowering family inside their cabin. All of it! All of it! I could see through the eyes and ears of every infected person. All of the glowing filaments spun around me now, as if I were some sort of luminescent jellyfish, able to feel each infected person like nerves at the end of my strands. But the glowing strands did nothing to illuminate the blackout. It was not real light, and did not exist in the material plane. When I tried to move, I stumbled over the corpse of Passenger X in the darkness. Frustrated, I felt for the wall. Damn this pitch black. I yearned for my flashlight. The glowing strands responded to my will, almost like flexing my fingers. I reached up, and the strands stretched toward the corridor's overhead lighting. At my whim, the fluorescent bulbs flickered and came on, bathing the highway in luminescence. And there, on the floor before me, Passenger X. Brown, matted hair, one eye missing, tongue lolling from his jaw. I gazed on his corpse dispassionately, feeling neither pity nor compassion. Indeed, feeling nothing whatsoever save for a mild curiosity. Why had the entity abandoned its previous host? But the answer came to me with the lights. You see, I'd wondered why it had taken so long for the infection to spread. But now, it suddenly struck me. Ordinary humans can't see the strands. With Passenger X as its host, the entity was essentially groping in the dark, blindly fumbling its way around the ship through trial and error. A slow, tedious process. My eyes, though, my body, my senses, using me was equivalent to the biblical "let there be light." Suddenly, it could see its strands, reaching through the material realm. I was the perfect vessel. And well, this revelation ought to have horrified me. Instead, it flooded me with an exuberant delight. We ripped doors off hinges, burst open dead bodies, and funneled the blood out of them in arcing red ribbons, spattering the walls and floor, just for the sheer joy of all that it could see and I could do. Brilliant. The more we flexed our power, the more cold I felt, bound to the depths. And with that cold came an even deeper, growing hunger.
Lower decks.
Looking back now, that time when I was under the entity's thrall had the hazy quality of a dream, like something happening to someone else. I don't remember wandering through the ship's bowels, unleashing terror in the staff lounge and mess hall and corridors, though I must have done so, as there was a lot of gore in my visions that was not there in my previous explorations, nor during my encounter with Passenger X. And so, I must have put it there myself. I remembered nothing at all, save that the sea star was my canvas, and I painted it with blood and anguish, until the hollow ache in my belly became an unbearable, bottomless yearning.
Feed.
We thought. This desire pulsed across the strands. The infected reacted, eating flesh, seawater, glass. With each rupture of agony in their bodies or minds came a pulse of energy back along their strand. Delicious. Intoxicating. A woman gnawed her knuckles down to the bone. A shirtless old man at the pool crunched into a drinking glass, the glass shattering and lacerating his tongue. No. Some part of me flinched away from this. A name. John. Oh God. What had I done? Abruptly, I came back to myself. The fluorescent lights winked out as I huddled on the floor. No, not John. The walls painted crimson, the bodies scattered throughout the corridor. Was it me all along? All these agonizing deaths I'd foreseen, had I been the reason for them? Fated, all along? Now that I'd returned to myself, horror flooded me.
Cass.
Perfect.
Vessel. Together. Fate.
Feed. No. The insatiable hunger carved me hollow. But while I still had some humanity, still had enough agency left to act, it was time to fulfill my destiny.
Cabin 4044.
I doused myself in a variety of cheap and expensive liquors. Then, I sat down in the space formerly occupied by my crispy corpse. In my trembling hand, I lifted a matchbook. Hope. I wasn't changing anything, of course. In my heart, I knew this. Fulfilling my vision meant I'd not only failed to alter my fate, but most likely anyone else's. But what else could I do? I sighed and lit a match. They say that sometimes people who are about to die see their lost loved ones. I've never believed such things. People call my vision supernatural, but to me there is nothing spiritual about it. All I've ever seen is the physical, rotting reality of death. But in that moment, as I lifted the match that would bring my fiery end, I heard my name. It struck me. I'd heard it a few times now. And for the briefest instant, in the golden light of the flame, was the brother I hadn't glimpsed in nearly 30 years. He again called my name. Hope. And in the same breath, the match flickered out. I was so startled that I dropped the burnt-out match, pawed at the sofa, wondering if I'd hallucinated him. And my hands found a note. The note I'd left scribbled a lifetime ago, when I was determined to try one more time. Fire and ice. It read, "Fuck a duck? What does that mean?" My brother had always loved poetry. The line he always recited to me, "Hope is the thing with feathers," was from an Emily Dickinson poem. But Fire and Ice was the title of a different poem by Robert Frost. Why to my future self would I invoke a poem about the world's end? I recited the poem. Some say the world will end in fire. Some say in ice. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold those who favor fire. But if I had to perish twice, I paused, struck. If I had to perish twice. Suddenly, the meaning clicked. My visions were of the future, but this entity drew my visions into the present so that it could interact with the material world. If it had the power to use my attunement like that, to affect time and fate and my special sight, what if I could also use it and, just once, change fate? Burning myself would mean fulfilling my own prophecy. It didn't even mean destroying the entity. After all, Passenger X had been dead, yet still possessed. There was every likelihood the entity would continue to use my corpse, no matter how crispy. My note was telling me not to perish by fire. No. But instead by... Well, granted there wasn't any ice, but there was plenty of cold, cold depths that could swallow the sea star and all her lifeboats, and ensure this abomination inside me never ever reach the shore. Hang on, Lily. I growled, rising to my feet. It's time to change fate.
The bridge.
A thick fog surrounded the Sea Star in an unnatural cloud when I emerged from the lower decks. Rain slammed the windows. It was as if all the weather and the world had responded to the conflict swirling inside myself. And as the entity fought to wrest control away, rain slashed through the sky, and the ocean itself seemed disturbed. I wondered if this was how Lily and Benjamin would die. Drowning in the volatile depths, I'd stirred. But I pushed these doubts aside as I forced my way onto the bridge. Barricaded inside, the captain and a handful of crew panicked when the door ripped off its hinges.
Look out!
Cried a man and lunged at me. I ducked his punch, grabbed him, and whispered in his ear,
You are mine.
taking his mind so violently and swiftly that he did not have the time for the usual moaning. He tackled his other crewmates for me while I grabbed the captain. The captain was a burly man, but he was nothing against my glowing filaments. And I tossed him down and bent my lips to his ear. Feeling the rush of those cold whispers rise inside me and through my lips and tongue.
You are mine. You are mine. You are mine. You are mine.
He looked dazed as I straightened, clapped his hands to the sides of his head, trying to shut out the filament already worming deep into his skull. Oh. Oops. I had to be careful about using this power. I'd meant to talk to the captain, not infect him. Oh well. I willed him to grab the intercom, which I sparked to life, and had him bark into it.
All passengers and crew, abandon ship. Repeat, abandon ship. Repeat, abandon ship immediately. Get into the water. You are
Mine. All mine.
The captain's words garbled around both my commands and the entities. The force of the thing's will was like a tsunami bearing down on me. But, I'd learned the futility of meeting force with force in Aikido. My might was inconsequential, minuscule. I was always smaller than my opponents. So I gave way, letting it shout through the captain's mouth,
You are mine. All mine. You are all mine.
and I reached over and cut the mic, then hit the alarm. A piercing siren blared.
Cassandra.
Boomed the entity. She didn't even know your name.
Cassandra.
Perfect.
Cassandra.
And I understood, at some primal level, the bargain that it offered me. In exchange for these people who had always overlooked me, the entity would give me all of its gifts, and people would know me now. No longer a passive bystander of death, but its deliverer. Not merely its prophet, but its architect.
Cassandra. We can devour the world.
But inside me, still, was a quiet voice. My quiet voice. The voice of the wallpaper, pondering Lily and the song she dedicated to me, pondering John and his kindness, pondering Benjamin and the reasons I'd stayed on the ship, so that I could use my eyes to see the iceberg and steer fate. I pondered its offer that we devour the world. Now, said that quiet voice, why would I ever want to do that? And then, as the thing channeled all of its roaring fury into a bottomless hunger that carved me so hollow, I was nothing but a gaping void, I succumbed to the entity's demand to feed. Unleashing the rage of every infected and sucking the energy from them, drinking them dry. My thirsty, glowing filaments pulsed with their suffering. But what the entity didn't realize is that I had surrendered to its will intentionally. And as we drank, I poured the energy along those filaments into an enormous swirling funnel. And with all its primordial might, I punched down, straight through the hull. The sea star, I ripped a massive hole in it and split it wide and let the water flood in. The great mass of metal groaned and listed as the cold depths rose up to swallow us. How about that? Turns out, I am the iceberg. The entity realized now its mistake. By forcing me to surrender to its hunger, it had given me too much raw power. But I wasn't done. The lifeboats. Each boat had to go. I sank them one by one. Oh, it tried to stop me, but it wasn't used to having a living, breathing host. I am sorry to say, I probably drowned a great many people. I hope some survived, either jumping off the boats before they sank or swimming out from them as they were going under. As I destroyed each boat, I grabbed the infected by their tethers and dragged them deep into the depths. I didn't have any attention to spare to notice whether there were any human survivors or not, or to save them if there were. By the time there was only one lifeboat left, I'd all but lost my mind. Singularly focused on dragging this last vessel into the sea, then drowning myself so the infection would never reach shore. The tether snapped. I felt it like the shock of a door slamming. And I was back to myself, tumbling to the deck on the bridge of the Sea Star. Rescue. If you have never seen a cruise ship sink, well, imagine a skyscraper, listing at some absurd angle. All that steel and glass reaching towards the sky as if in one last gasp. Such a massive vessel does not sink immediately, but more at a pace like an iceberg melting, looming drunkenly sideways in its slow and inevitable descent. No living passengers remained. I have no idea how many jumped overboard at the announcement to abandon ship. But certainly, by the time I regained consciousness, there was not a single living soul aboard the ship. The infected had all torn each other and any survivors apart in that last feeding frenzy. And as I crawled my way out to the deck, pulling my way up the railing along the listing surface, there was no one there to greet me, save the corpses, exactly as I'd foreseen them, but fresher now, and real. My heart sank as I thought of Lily and Benjamin, wondering if they'd made it out. The thick, unnatural fog shrouding the ocean made it impossible to see if there were any survivors. I couldn't even make out the waves, lost in mist below as they lapped against the ship. The Sea Star was quiet as a mausoleum. Nothing but a tomb being slowly engulfed into the cold, hungry abyss. I called out into the fog, heart fluttering in hope of a response. None came. A life preserver, one of the last still hitched to the railing, kept me afloat as the Sea Star went under. It was a fishing vessel that eventually found me, adrift and barely conscious, out on the open ocean.
The end.
And now we are back to where I began. No distress signal was ever sent. But of course, the Coast Guard assumed that the suddenness of the storm and the alleged rogue wave were the reason for both the Sea Star's lack of communication and its disappearance. The sole escaping lifeboat was recovered. But though some Coast Guard members claimed horrifying details in their reports, these reports were quickly shushed. Inquiries from family and loved ones were met with vague assurances from the Coast Guard about how they were searching for survivors and would notify the families of their findings. But overall, they have remained tight-lipped. So, I began this account for two purposes. First, to share the truth, and also my regrets. I did what I did to keep this abomination from spreading. But that is cold comfort for those who lost their lives or loved ones. Second, I wrote this in hopes I might hear from someone, anyone, who survived. Lily, I left several messages on your phone, as well as with Roy at the bar, hoping against hope that somehow you and Benjamin made it back. I cannot tell you how tremendously it lightened my heart to get your message. You left me such a kind voicemail, explaining the NDAs you, and I presume other survivors, had to sign after being picked up by the Coast Guard. How you were kept in quarantine for weeks while they monitored you for symptoms. How they asked you countless questions about what happened aboard the Sea Star, but offered no answers in return. It's no wonder you weren't able to reach out any sooner. I'm so glad you both survived. And not only you, but others as well. That is good. But I regretfully must decline your request that we meet up. Oh, not because the NDA. It's, well, I remember all too well, during those many years, what it was like to meet someone, only to shake their hand and know their time was up. That all their future plans were fruitless. How do you tell someone anything when you know they're going to die? What do you even say? And so, I'd spare you that. There's no point in our meeting, you see. And I have no regrets, mind you. That changing fate comes with a cost. And I am so very glad for the lives I did save. Yours, and the boys, and others. I truly hope those lives are lived long and well. And I should think they will be. I do very much like to think so. But there's little sense in visiting me, because for the past few days, since the most recent post actually, I've noticed that regardless of what I do, even if I bathe them in warm water or hold them under a hot bath, my hands are always cold.